Good afternoon or evening, everybody. Welcome back to another weather forecast here by Agent Weather Forecast, and it is now October 1st, meaning I guess you could call it the official start to the spooky season. So, speaking of spooky season, I'm gonna be talking about whether we could see a cold fall based on the current pattern we are seeing right now, and as well with the future predictions. So, I'm just gonna go overall seeing just going over the overall current conditions right now with the Enzo forecast, the current SST, etc., and then go into the next future week and see whether this could pattern we're seeing right now lead to a cold and potential snowy fall for portions of the United States. But before we get in the video, I would recommend you guys subscribe to the channel, smash this like button, and hit that bell icon so we can get as many people aware of this video, obviously, especially since I know a lot of people and a lot of my viewers love fall and winter related videos. So let's go ahead and try to spread the word about this video so we can get as many people informed on this topic as well. Maybe fall and winter levels who have not seen my channel yet will eventually find my video because of you guys helping out. But without further ado, let's get into the forecast. So first thing I want to start off is in the Enzo summary here. This updated actually September 27th. So it's actually updated a few days ago. So here's the overall look at the summary based on the latest information we have so far. So SSTs in the equatorial Pacific are near to below average across most of the Pacific Ocean. So as we go into the cooler seasons, as we transition into that cooler season, transitioning from the tropics to basically into the fall season, we are going to start seeing these waters start to rapidly cool off, and as well with the enhanced trade winds we're expecting next future weeks, we're going to start seeing a lot of these waters across the equatorial Pacific start to cool down. So that's why we are still under a La Nina watch and entering actually La Nina status. A transition from Enzo neutral to La Nina is favored in the next couple of months, with a 70 to 80% chance of La Nina during the northern hemisphere winter of 2021 and 2022. So we have a very high chance and high confidence that a La Nina will transition most likely by the end of October. So we will most likely have an official La Nina by the time we get towards November, and that's obviously going to help obviously affect the atmospheric conditions we're seeing not only in the United States but as well across the Pacific Ocean. But we are already starting to see those conditions and La Nina characteristics start to accumulate as we look in the next future weeks compared to the first week of September to now. We are starting to see this transition into a La Nina. Another big factor that is kind of coming into play of the overall current conditions we have been seeing here developing and unrolling and unraveling within the past few weeks across the Pacific is actually the OLRs and as well the trade winds. So we are seeing some deeper negative OLRs basically across portions of the southeast of Asia vicinity as well, just basically north of Oceania, where we are seeing some enhanced convection. So basically, negative LRs is basically enhanced convection, seeing as well kind of MJO type characteristics. You start to see negative OLRs within MJOs or even Kelvin waves, but in this case, it's going to be the MJO that we're experiencing right now across the Western Pacific and obviously it's transitioning towards the Central Pacific. But we are seeing obviously OLR anomalies that are pretty deep into the negative digits there. So we are seeing some pretty good amount of convection and precipitation developing across the Western Pacific, which is exactly what you would see in a La Nina play out there, where you see obviously the easterly winds obviously push all of that cooler waters as far west as basically the Fiji area, and that kind of pushes all out really warm waters across the oceanic area, and that kind of allows for a lot of that really strong kind of updraft and allowing for some really, actually more like, yeah, those updrafts that's going to allow for some really good and actually stationary type weather with really heavy rain in monsoon seasons. And that's exactly what we're seeing right now in place with the MJO. We are seeing a lot of precipitation as well, really enhanced amount of convection, which this could very well be a sign, and most likely that will help allow for a rapid or a more rapid development and rapid towards the actual La Nina status, because this MJO will help suppress and actually enhance the trade winds, the easterly trade winds, actually pushing those cooler waters pretty far west pretty early on. But here's the overall look now at the 850 HPA easterly wind anomalies. Obviously, easterly wind anomalies were evident over most of the equatorial Pacific Ocean. You can see obviously some really good easterlies with some pretty enhanced amounts of easterlies, and that's obviously coming in from the South American area and then 200 HP in the upper level. Westerly wind anomalies were observed over most of the equatorial Pacific Ocean as well. So obviously, you're going to kind of be seeing the development, obviously, of the MJO going towards the east here. But obviously, as you see those easterlies a little bit into the mid and lower levels, we are going to be obviously experiencing some pretty enhanced amount of overall convection all across this vicinity, as well as seeing that cooler weather, which I'll be showing you guys the pattern, but you see that cooler weather then dropping off there, and the cool and dry weather off South America and as well near Central America. So here's now a look at the latest update here on the probability, the Mjf Forecast for La Nina, Neutral, or El Nino. So obviously we are kind of seeing this blue dominance right now for at least maybe half year, so 6 months. I guess you can maybe 6 months because we're just in October. So yeah, that would be about maybe more like 5 months of just blue dominance. You can see blue, blue, bloom, 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 blue. Obviously, you're still seeing some gray, obviously, but that's going to really decrease as we get deeper into the fall season, obviously, into obviously October, November, December, getting to that very deep part of the fall season, as well as September, October, November. You can just see that chance for the neutral really decreases here, and then we see a pretty rapid growth. So it's kind of seeing an increase there in the La Nina probability with a extra part with a decrease in neutral probability. So it's going to really favor a pretty big difference between the probability of La Nina and neutral, obviously getting a pretty high probability, and we're seeing increasing at a constant rate all the way up to the point where we get towards November, December, January. That's where we have our highest probability for La Nina, with basically around 79%, almost 80%, which is really, really high. And then once you get kind of past the January, the probability starts to decrease here to December, January. And obviously that's as a result of the beginning of spring. As spring continues, obviously, or spring arrives, or we get close to spring, obviously those waters will start to warm up, getting ready for the tropical season. So obviously it's pretty normal to see then that probability of neutral, even El Nino, start to increase as the waters start to warm up, and obviously as the trade winds start to die off a little bit less. But still going to be seeing La Nina being the leading probability till this January, February, and March. So still watching a pretty long time period of up to around 5 months of really high probabilities for La Nina. So here's the actual probabilities for the seasonal forecast. So again, August, September, October, we're now in the last month of this time frame. Is 63% chance of La Nina. But as we get to September, October, November, which is exactly where we're at right now, there's a 73% chance. And according to Tropical Tidbits, we are at negative 0.5 degrees Celsius at 3.4. So we already have the status number, but with the stay consistent with that for the next few weeks, and we most likely could very well see a La Nina officially by the end of October, and then obviously November, December, January, the highest probability with a 79%. You can see it kind of start to increase at a constant rate. They're obviously increasing 10 within this time period, then 5, and then 1, and then start to decrease at a constant rate, then going down 8, then going obviously down, continuing to go down, then by 12, and then by 14, and then continues to go down. But obviously this is going to be the peak here, the November, December, January, because even here from now on towards February, we have a 0% chance for El Nino, and then start to increase. Same thing with the neutral, and then La Nina decreases after December, or actually November, December, and January. But of course, most likely you stick with this La Nina like last year to the point we get towards early spring, and then neutral most likely take over for the severe weather season. So I now want to transition to a little bit more deeper in depth with the actual knowledge of the current conditions we have right now. So some of you guys may or may not know this, obviously. I really have not talked about this whatsoever in my winter forecast in previous years. And actually haven't really used this in a winter forecast or a fall forecast until my actually latest winter forecast, which is around a month ago, or maybe 2 weeks ago. Something like that. I think it was more 2 weeks ago. But obviously, as I get more knowledge, I will continue to spread this knowledge. So actually, I didn't get this type of knowledge with the actual 850 HPA zonal wind anomalies till actually early this summer. So I'm trying to continue to transition this type of knowledge towards the winter and the fall. So obviously, looking at the 850 HPA zonal wind anomalies, this is actually looking from anywhere 5 degrees south or 5 degrees north. So obviously, here's a world on the obviously east or west coordinates. And here's the overall look at the zonal wind. So blue will obviously indicate we are going to be seeing some negative VPUs, and that's going to basically indicate easterlies. So easterlies is what you see within those blues, which obviously goes from east to west, and that's what you typically obviously see within those areas of basically really high amounts of concentrated convection. So obviously into the obviously Central Pacific and all that, that's where we basically see the eastern valleys there. Obviously, you see the east. But yeah, basically, yeah. So the west is obviously going to be, let's see here, I believe 120 west is actually like the eastern Pacific right here. And this would obviously, I believe, be kind of the westernish Central Pacific. So it's actually Central Pacific. Or actually, yeah, because I think 140 west to like 180 is like around the Central Pacific. I think so. So this would obviously be concentrated between the western and the Central Pacific right here. And this would obviously be then the Atlantic, and this would be kind of into the Indian Ocean. And basically, that's, yeah, basically that. So obviously within this two lines, we're going to watch out for the main characteristics of La Nina right now. And that's where we're seeing really a high concentration of negative VPUs here. We've seen this continue ever since September. Obviously, we saw the Kelvin waves, the CCKW. Now we're seeing the MJO causing really, obviously, deep amounts of negative VPUs here and a really strong easterly flow, and as well as seeing a really enhanced amount of convection, as well pretty good amount of overall divergence. So we are seeing some pretty good conditions indicating we are seeing some strong easterlies across the Pacific, allowing for these waters and as well allowing for this MJO to continue to stall across portions of the Western Pacific, enhancing the process towards to get to a La Nina. And as we go from October 1st to now October 6th, 8th, and 6th, 7th, and 8th, we're going to continue to see these negative BPUs, and they will continue as this MJO processes towards obviously the east. We're going to obviously see this now transition to the Eastern Pacific, and that's going to allow now for maybe more of a I guess you could say it will be good. I guess you could say in the way that it continues to push those cold waters westward, even at a quicker rate or a more widespread rate. But then it'll allow for kind of the really, I guess you say warm, and as well those negative OLRs will start to push into the Eastern Pacific, which will most likely kind of maybe stall the process a little bit towards La Nina. But right now, we are rapidly getting toward that process. So again, here's a look at the Mjf forecast. So obviously right now we see the MJO basically specifically right here across the Western Pacific, but seeing a lot of really widespread amount of negative VPUs here. We're seeing a lot of negative, obviously, velocity potential across this vicinity. And as we go into week 1, this MJO starts to push its way obviously eastward, and then by week 2, by October 15th, is obviously down to the Eastern Pacific. So this is obviously going to really this enhance the process, allowing for those really good easterlies. So yeah, 180s right here. So yeah, we kind of have the kind of had the coordinates right, because I'm always kind of really mixing up the coordinates sometimes. But of course, it's going to allow for a lot of enhanced amount of overall precipitation, enhanced monsoon season across the Western Pacific, and that's going to allow for obviously again the pretty good trade winds, which we're already experiencing right now. Obviously the easterlies, and that's going to allow basically the process to kind of see the cool and dry weather kind of drop off. You kind of see the process here. You see, then you get the trade winds, then you see the updrafts, and then you see obviously then as it goes into the upper levels, you start to see the westerlies, and then it kind of just drops off the cool and the downdraft, the cool weather. And that's basically the process what you see with these easterlies, and that's exactly the process we're starting to see right now, indicating we could very well get very close to La Nina right now. So here's now a look at a more detailed chart towards La Nina conditions. I know a lot of people kind of specifically only know what La Nina conditions would bring specifically only to the United States. So I'm going to help expand this knowledge and why it does bring that to the United States, but as well what it does for the actual rest of the Pacific, and from basically the Pacific and even the Indian Ocean. So first easy thing that's basically noticed within La Nina conditions, or not conditions, but patterns, you see an increase and enhancement of easterly trade winds. You gotta be easterly trade winds. So this obviously cool waters we see start developing the early season in the around September off South America start to push westward. That's gonna allow for really widespread cold water across the central and as well equatorial Pacific. and that's going to kind of push these really warm waters basically towards Oceania and the Southeast Asia region. So these easterly trade winds as well will push that stormy weather all across Indonesia. It's going to kind of act as an MJO, just enhance the monsoon season. And then as you get towards basically that, once it gets towards this vicinity, it's going to see obviously a strong updraft. And then the upper levels of westerlies take it back towards Central America and the Americas, and then it drops back into the downdraft, and it drops that cold and dry weather. So it's basically just a process because of trade wind and the overall pattern, boom, and then boom. It's just going to continue as long as the easterly trade winds continue to enhance. So that's going to allow basically for really wet and warmy weather across the Pacific, or specifically Western Pacific and Oceania, and that's going to allow for dry and cold weather across the South America and Central America region. But what will that bring for the United States as well? Well, it's always going to allow for this subtropical jet to basically stay pretty far north, and that's going to allow for some pretty dry weather across the southern portion of the United States, and allow for that really strong high pressure to kind of stay basically within a negative PNA type pattern, after that really strong that strong Alaskan ridge to stay pretty far, actually, pretty far, pretty close to the United States, basically, in a way. That's going to allow for this really good, basically, that's going to allow for pretty frequent short waves, and as well low jets to dip into the United States, and that's going to allow for some pretty cold and stormy weather across areas north of the Rossby Wave, across the Dakotas, across the Rockies. That's going to allow for that really strong high pressure, the southeast ridge to stick across the eastern United States. That's basically what's going to allow for the United States, basically, and then the good low pressure, that really strong, obviously, negative Arctic oscillation associated with this, and then you see obviously the clouds. Obviously, you kind of see the MJO, the rain, and the updraft, and then you see that kind of cold weather, that kind of cold. This is basically the overall kind of summary of what you would see in a La Nina condition or forecast. So even the Kansas model there, the obviously long-range climatology model, is forecasting these cold waters to continue to push westward as a result of these easterly trade winds. So here's an example of what they have right now in October. Obviously pretty cold water. That's where the kind of cold water starts to kind of, I guess, stop. And then as we get now towards November, then it pushes all the way over here, and that continues all the way into December. Really, really cold water, though. It's going to continue to enhance, become more widespread. So that's obviously going to as well pretty, I guess, stimulate the idea of a La Nina, because even the Kansas is forecasting that type of forecast with favoring this cold water to continue to become more widespread across the equatorial Pacific. Let's now get a look here at the basically future 30-plus day out here on the 500 millibar high anomaly. So basically right now, obviously, we are seeing a pretty stubborn high pressure, specifically centered across the north-central United States, allowing for some pretty warm and dry weather, basically, acting like the southeast ridge. It's like basically sitting on the Great Lakes, and then we see that pretty strong high pressure basically pushing southward the Alaskan ridge. That's going to allow for a pretty good negative, or actually this is kind of a slightly negative tilted trough. That's going to allow for some pretty cold weather to sneak in the northwest United States for the first few days of October. And obviously, you typically see positive PNAs towards kind of El Nino type characteristics, while you see the negative PNAs within basically La Nina type characteristics. So obviously, the further south the ridge is, and the further closer it is to the United States, that's going to allow for a better chance to see cold weather across the northwest United States, because that means that ridge will basically go up like this and then dip right into the United States, and that's going to allow it to rise back into a strong ridge, allowing for the really strong high pressure to stay in the southeast ridge. Really good low jet, possibly more frequent open short waves, allowing for some good rocky snowstorms in the October timeframe, but looking really good for the next basically first 2 weeks of October there for the Northwest. It looks alright for the Southeast United States. It looks like it's going to be kind of more of a neutral type pattern here, with kind of cooler weather across the Southeast as well, pretty cold weather across the Northwest. It looks like, though, it will be a pretty warm, it'll be kind of more of a pretty warm there Northeast, though, as we see a pretty good weaker ridge there. But I mean, it doesn't look too shabby, though, for really many parts according to the CFS Daily, though. I mean, it does not look too shabby whatsoever. Looks like the strongest ridge, obviously, pattern will be for the first few days. But after that, we see some pretty cool weather there. I mean, this high pressure is pretty far south but really good, cool trough weather. Pretty widespread across the United States. Could see looks like a ridge pattern there across Texas, but other than that, it does not look too shabby. Obviously, it's pretty far out, but at the time we get now towards kind of the 25th time period, we start to see obviously that kind of ridge is pretty still staying pretty far in place across the overall vicinity of north of Ontario and that general in Quebec and that general vicinity. And that's going to allow for some pretty cool weather again to sneak in. You see kind of a weak trough starting to set up like that, and that's going to allow for some pretty cool weather, most likely across the eastern United States on the last few days of October. And after that, as we get now to November, it looks like this ridge starts to kind of push its way southward, and we're going to kind of start seeing now a little bit less widespread cooler weather. But other than that, the pattern doesn't look too shabby for some widespread cool weather across October. Let's now look at the overall 500 or 850 millibar anomaly here for temperatures. Obviously, the first few days, for the first 2 weeks specifically, it's going to be very warm, especially for areas near like Ontario, for Alberta, for Quebec. It's going to be pretty warm across much of southeastern Canada for the first few days. And as well, like I just said, it's looking pretty good for the Northwest for the next few days as well. Could start to see some higher snowfall chances as we start to see these cold fronts continue to move in, as well these short waves continue to move in. It's going to allow for some really good conditions there. With that cold weather, you're going to start seeing kind of some Ana-type cold fronts with a really deep temperature gradient. And then as we now get kind of towards mid-October, like I did say, it's not going to look too shabby whatsoever. I mean, we could very well see kind of below average October for a lot of people here, especially towards the eastern United States on the last few days of October there. It looks like a really good, pretty stubborn trough will kind of stay in place, and that southeast ridge will be pretty weak, but by the time we get towards the first days of November, it's going to start to be pretty stubborn across the Midwest and the East once again with a pretty large high pressure. But look at this. It looks like the southeast will be pretty cold for quite a while here, so it's not like we're going to be seeing a really deep kind of La Nina conditions all of a sudden start to pop up here. It looks not too shabby whatsoever all the way into early November. So could we actually see a pretty widespread cold or cooler October instead of a very warm southeast and warm southwest? Obviously, it's going to be pretty warm across the Midwest for the next 2 weeks or so. But, I mean, the southeast, actually, in the mid-Atlantic and northeast does not look too shabby whatsoever. I mean, it looks like a pretty good pattern for parts of the country here. But I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you guys later.